Every once in a while, we come across orchid buds that dry up and drop. This is referred to as bud blast. Bud blast is every orchid hobbyist's worst nightmare. It can make you very anxious and disappointed, especially after the hard work you have put in to care for your orchid, and of course, not to forget the long wait for its blooms. Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I am Anupama from Mumbai. I recently had issues with bud blasts in my orchids. Now, here is what is important. Bud blasts can be caused by many different reasons such as inadequate fertilizing, sudden temperature shifts, drop in humidity levels, transport stress, inadequate watering, and many others. However, sudden change in temperature, exposure to warm dry breeze, and dehydration are the most commonly observed reasons causing bud blast. I discovered recently that orchids having bud spikes suffer in fluctuating environments and therefore need stable conditions to successfully bloom. Two of my orchids suffered bud blasts due to sudden dry and warm climatic fluxes that dried up the root system far too quickly. The first one is the Renanthera monachica, which was bare rooted. It generally blooms during the warmer months and is pretty resistant to very bright light and warm temperatures. The second one is the Rodriguezia vinista. It came mounted on a small piece of teak wood and has a good root system. It needs bright indirect light and warm temperatures to spike. I have observed that both these orchids are sensitive to their root systems drying up even for a short while. They react to this shock by drying up buds and spikes. Let me give you a brief idea of the climatic conditions of my area. Mumbai has a tropical climate. Humidity levels and temperatures are very conducive for growing orchids. But during October and November, daytime temperatures begin to rise and humidity levels begin to drop. This dry heat, coupled with warm breeze, leads to bud blasts in orchids. A similar phenomenon takes place in March and April when temperatures begin rising along with a dip in humidity levels. So there is a high incidence of bud blasts during these months. To give you a better perspective, I will take you to my grow area. I grow my orchids on the windowsills of my third floor apartment. Since my apartment is a west facing one, most of my windows get strong direct afternoon light, which is not suitable for orchids. However, I have made some makeshift arrangements using a white shade cloth to shield my orchids from direct sunlight and heat during the afternoons. This arrangement works great for me. I tuck the shade cloth up after 4 pm when it is relatively cooler. And I follow this throughout the year. My orchids continue to grow well in these conditions. Now, coming back to my affected orchids, I purchased them in October 2022. They were healthy. The Renanthera monachica also came with a tiny spike. All was well and the buds developed to blooming size. I was excited and eagerly awaited for the buds to open. Unfortunately, just before blooming, the buds turned a deep orange and shriveled up one after the other. This could have been triggered due to the dehydration as I went on a holiday for about 5 days. So I put it down to stress and dehydration. The bud blast continued with only 1 or 2 blooms opening up. I was very disappointed, but thought that it could be due to stress caused by a change in the environment, coupled with a lack of hydration when I was away. The orchid, however, continued to grow normally. In March, I was excited to notice a bud spike again. I was filled with anticipation of a good bloom season this time. Unfortunately, the mature buds again began blasting just before opening. I kept shifting the orchid to cooler places, misted it several times during the day, but the buds continued to blast. I lost a total of 9 buds, one after the other. I was desperately trying to find the cause. It did point out to inadequate nutrition, but I brushed aside the thought since all my other orchids looked healthy and had a lot of vigor. At this juncture, I learned from Danny, aka Miss Orchid Girl's YouTube videos that the Renanthera monachica does not like it if its roots dry up. A shout out to Danny for providing me with this excellent tip. It did come as a surprise since I was under the impression that vandas grow better when kept bare rooted. I learned that this one, unlike other vandas, prefers perpetual humid conditions around its root system. The obvious explanation to this phenomenon is that the orchid's nutritional requirements increase during the bloom cycle. A dehydrated orchid is often malnourished and lacking in energy for blooming. The orchid cannot cope with such nutritional deficiencies during this crucial period and therefore decides to abort or eliminate the buds in order to conserve energy for its survival. Having understood the cause, I immediately used small grade cork bark chips along with a handful of coconut husk chips to pot the bare rooted orchid. I layered the bottom of the pot with a few coconut chips which are moisture retentive and spread some cork chips on top of it for providing aeration. I repeated the layers again and placed the basket in the pot. I added more cork chips until the root system was fully covered. I watered the orchid and allowed the excess water to drain off. With a silent prayer, I placed the orchid in its place. The next morning, to my surprise, the bud had not blasted. Instead, the orchid had a beautiful bloom. I was excited over my, let's say, overnight success, but I wanted to test it further. After 2 days, a second bloom opened and I was thrilled over my success. Since then, the remaining buds have opened normally. I am happy about my success and wanted to share this experience and learning with you guys. An obvious takeaway from this experience is to maintain adequate humidity levels around the root system to provide the plant with a continuous supply of nutrients, thereby preventing bud blast. So we need to be extra cautious and keep a lookout for these unexpected situations, especially if the roots get completely dried up, even for a short while, as in the case of my affected bare rooted and mounted orchids. We need to react at the earliest to arrest it at the early stages. Of course, not all orchids are sensitive to these fluctuations. My Phalaenopsis orchids were also in spike but continued to develop and bloom unaffected by the dry and warm temperatures. Maybe because their roots are sitting in a moisture retentive medium. So maintaining adequate moisture around the root system is important for successfully blooming your orchid. This is especially important in the case of bare rooted and mounted orchids, which are more prone to drying up quickly. But I wasn't so lucky with my other orchid, the Rodrigueza venusta. I did not get the chance to salvage the damage, so I can at best put it down to a good learning experience. The orchid seemed to be growing just fine. It had some coconut husk around the roots, which was sufficient to give it a good wet dry cycle. I left it undisturbed and in February it developed 2 spikes. But both spikes began to turn yellow and shriveled up due to the warm dry breeze. I shifted it to a cooler place, but the damage was already done. So I will just have to wait until the orchid blooms next year. It has now gone into vegetative growth. I am planning to mount it on cork bark and will provide it with some extra moss during its bloom cycle to maintain sufficient moisture levels around the roots. Time and again we will face such challenges. Overcoming these issues will lead to better understanding of how we can care for our orchids. Hope you found this video helpful. I will leave behind a link in the description below to my blog post on care tips for orchids during the warm summer months. Do leave behind a comment if you are facing any issues with your orchids. I will see if I can help you resolve them. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you like the content, do subscribe to my channel for regular updates on orchid care. Until my next happy growing.